17 months. That's how long detectives in Arundel County have been sitting on this case with no arrests, no charges, no closure. And now the woman at the center of it is on live at the gym telling us investigators dropped by mid-workout to say she's Clay. Something about that math ain't mathing. She's not whispering anymore. She's yelling. And yelling has a way of writing its own confession, even when the mouth's saying the opposite. You'll press subscribe real quick and slap the bell, because what she said on that live isn't the story. What she didn't say is, like, seriously, hit follow, ride with me to the end. This one's got layers. Here's the frame, cold and clean. Chrisean Rock, government name Chrisean Malone, hopped on Instagram Live in late July 2026 to answer for the death of Karon Makhai Cann, the man the internet knew as Ronnie. Karon was 24. He was found with multiple gunshot wounds outside a house in Severn, Maryland, on February 3, 2025. And Arundel County Police pronounced him dead around 7:10 p.m. The case is still open, still unsolved. 17 months and counting, according to. Now, before we watch the pieces not fit, you need to understand who Karon actually was, because the internet flattened him into a footnote and that flattening is part of the story. Karon Kim wasn't some random name that materialized in a headline the week he died. He was a Baltimore figure, the city that raised Chrisean, the city she never stopped repping even when the Hollywood money came in. He'd been in her orbit for years. Friends first, reportedly, then something more, then something public and ugly. By 2024, he had built a small but loud online presence of his own, and the engine of that presence, the thing that kept his name circulating, was one repeated demand, a DNA test. He believed, and said so on camera more than once, that the child the world knew as Blueface's son might actually be his. That's the axis this whole story spins on. Not the matter, the question underneath the matter. And you need to clock the environment Karon was living in when he made that demand. Baltimore streets don't play about reputations, and a man publicly claiming paternity of a famous woman's child is making two moves at once. He's challenging a celebrity's narrative, and is embarrassing another man. A man with money, with reach, and with a documented, widely reported history of violence-related legal trouble. Blueface, Jonathan Michael Porter, has spent the last several years cycling in and out of courtrooms and custody, as reported extensively by outlets covering his various cases, from the Las Vegas shooting case that shadowed him for years to the probation violations that eventually put him behind bars in 2024. That's the backdrop. That's the room Karon was shouting in. When he demanded that test, he wasn't just asking a lab question. He was stepping on the one storyline holding an entire content empire together. Keep that in your pocket. We're coming back to it. Now watch how the pieces don't fit. Rock, on live, arms flailing, voice cracking like a snare. His death has nothing to do with me. Yes, he made my life about him. Why? 'Cause he needed money. He was desperate. That's our opening move. Attack the dead man's credibility before the cop's question even gets asked. Reported by the Shade Room. Dry. Okay. Now let's sit on that opening move for a second, because it deserves more than a shrug. In interview preparation terms, and Rock has been in front of cameras long enough to have absorbed some media training whether she paid for it or not. The first sentence out of your mouth in a denial sets the frame for everything after it. Media trainers call it the anchor. The anchor she chose wasn't grief. It wasn't I lost someone I once cared about. It wasn't even a clean, simple I didn't do it. The anchor was he needed money. A financial motive. Assigned to the victim. Within seconds. And here's the part that keeps me up. That framing isn't random. If the dead man's entire public campaign was about paternity, about a child, about a name, then painting him as a clout chaser with empty pockets reframes the DNA demand as an extortion attempt instead of a fatherhood claim. See how that works? You don't have to disprove his question if you can stain his reason for asking it. It's a classic character-first defense, and defense attorneys use it in courtrooms every single day. The difference is, courtrooms have cross-examination. Instagram Live has a comment section full of hearts. Then, deeper in the same stream, the sentence that made every phone in the timeline vibrate at once. Nobody was trying to save Karon before he died, bro. Because you sit over there. You act like y'all wasn't trafficking the drugs through his basement. I keep being quiet because low-key I love Karon. Per the Instagram clip circulated by DJ Academic's feed. Wait, read that again. She says she loves him, low-key, in the same breath she's telling the world he was trafficking out his grandmother's basement. That's not defense. That's a eulogy written by the prosecution. Let me unpack why that sentence detonated the way it did. Because some of y'all saw the clip, felt the chill, and couldn't name why. It's doing three things at once, and none of them help her. First, it's an accusation. Y'all wasn't trafficking the drugs through his basement, aimed at Karon's own people, which implies she has specific knowledge of the operation. Not rumors. Knowledge. Where she was standing, what she saw, who y'all is. Second, it's a confession of proximity. I keep being quiet because low-key I love Karon means she had information she chose to sit on. And the reason she sat on it was emotional attachment to the man who later turned up dead. Investigators call that consciousness of involvement, not of the crime itself, necessarily, but of circumstances around it. Third, and this is the one nobody clocked, it's a loyalty flex aimed at a specific audience. I keep being quiet isn't said to the police. It's said to the streets. It's a message that reads, I know things, and I've protected people, and don't make me stop protecting them. On a public stream, with the case open, and before anybody says I'm reaching, understand that this pattern, the live-as confession booth, has been Chrisean Rock's native language for years. This is a woman whose entire public arc, from the Blue Girls Club days through the Zeus Network run through the relationship turmoil that played out in real time across multiple platforms, has been built on saying the quiet part loud, and then dealing with the fallout later. It's the brand. It's also, in the context of an open homicide investigation, the liability. Every past live is now potential context. Every old clip is now an exhibit somebody somewhere is timestamping. Karon's own aunt, before all of this exploded, told followers, where was y'all at when he was out in New York, when he was on the drugs? Family closing ranks. But that quote, captured across the neighborhood talk, reads different now, because the aunt was defending Karon before the murder chatter turned into a manhunt. Rock is echoing the aunt's language to shield herself. Same words, opposite purpose. Then there's the sister. Tesehki, half-sister, occasional public enemy, sat down for a podcast that traveled everywhere. If I was to speak on it, it don't look too good for certain people that we know. So I'm not gonna speak on it. The Shade Room had that clip in rotation for a week straight. Damn. Not a word wasted. She said everything by saying nothing. Now, for anybody who hasn't been following the Rock family saga, and honestly, bless your peace, you need the weight of that quote, because it only lands if you know the history. Chrisean and Tesehki have spent years in one of the most publicly documented sibling feuds in reality TV. Physical altercations on camera. Diss tracks, essentially, delivered through interviews. Whole arcs of their respective shows built around the bad blood. These are not sisters who cover for each other out of habit. If anything, Tesehki's track record suggests she'd be the first one to speak if speaking hurt Chrisean. So when a person with that history, a person whose brand literally includes not holding her tongue, looks into a camera and says it don't look too good for certain people that we know, so I'm not gonna speak on it, you have to ask the obvious follow-up. What changed? What is heavy enough to make the loudest member of the family go quiet? Because silence, from her, is not free. Silence costs her content, costs her relevance, costs her the one thing her career runs on. She paid that cost voluntarily. Somebody's interests were worth more than the footage. And notice the craftsmanship of the sentence itself. Citing people that we know. Not my sister. Not anyone specific. A plural, vague, deniable construction that lets every viewer fill in their own blank. That's not accidental phrasing. That's a person who knows the case is open, knows clips get subpoenaed, knows that a name spoken on a podcast is a name a detective can underline. She gave the audience everything and gave the record nothing. In a weird way, it's the most disciplined thing anyone in this family's orbit has said on camera in years. And TMZ, doing what TMZ does, got the police confirmation itself. The investigation is still active. Put TMZ, July 31st, 2026. Which, hold on, directly contradicts what Rock is telling her viewers. She's saying investigators told her we know you didn't do it. Police are telling reporters the case is open. Both cannot be true at once. Somebody's lying. And it's not the police report. Here's why that contradiction matters more than it looks like it does. Police departments, and in Arundel County is no exception, do not confirm or deny the status of individual persons of interest to the press. They just don't. It's standard practice across basically every jurisdiction in the country. The case is either open or closed. Arrests either happened or they didn't. And beyond that, the official line is silence. So when TMZ got the investigation is still active, that's the maximum amount of information a department will ever give mid-case. It's not the minimum. Now flip it. Rock's claim is that investigators came to her, mid-workout, at the gym, which is its own cinematic detail we need to circle back to, and told her she's cleared. Put aside whether that's true for a second. Ask a simpler question. What would it mean if it were true? If detectives actually showed up at her gym to personally deliver an exoneration, that would be one of the strangest investigative procedures in modern policing. Detectives clear people by closing files, not by field trips. You don't get a wellness visit from homicide. You get a knock, an interview request, maybe a warrant. What you don't get is reassurance. So there are really only two reads on the gym story, and neither is comfortable. Read 1. It didn't happen the way she described, and the live audience is being managed. Read 2. Something did happen at that gym. A contact, a conversation, maybe even an interview. And what she took away from it, or chose to present from it, got re-engineered into a clearance. Because here's the thing about telling your followers the cops said I'm good. The cops will never publicly correct you. It's a claim that can't be debunked in real time. It's checkable only by the case file. And the case file, 17 months deep, is still locked. Let's braid this thing. February 3rd, 2025. Karon is shot dead in Severn. He'd been publicly demanding a DNA test for months, insisting Chrisean Jr., born in 2023, might be his. The Yahoo Complex rundown confirms he was targeted, not a random robbery, not a stray, a targeted shooting. Let me add some muscle to that word, targeted, because in homicide reporting, targeted is a term investigators reach for carefully, and it tells you more than people realize. A targeted shooting means the shooter knew who they were looking for. It means the location wasn't coincidence, outside a house, in a residential area, at a time of day when the victim's presence there was knowable. It means, statistically, the pool of people with reason and knowledge narrows fast. Random violence is chaos. Targeted violence is a schedule. Somebody knew where Karon would be, when he'd be there, and what he'd look like when he stepped outside. That kind of knowledge doesn't come from strangers. And zoom out on the timeline of the demand itself. Through the back half of 2024, Karon wasn't subtle. This wasn't a private legal dispute unfolding through attorneys and sealed filings. He was saying it on camera, on social media, in the kind of clips that travel. Every time the story cooled off, he warmed it back up, which means two things were true simultaneously going into 2025. Karon was the single loudest threat to the established paternity narrative, and everyone in the extended orbit, Rock's camp, Blueface camp, the family's camp, the fan base, the blogs, knew exactly who he was and exactly what he wanted. There was no anonymity left. No quiet path. The question he'd been asking for months was scheduled, eventually, to get a legal answer. He never lived to see it asked in a courtroom. February 3rd took care of that. Days later, Rock does something almost nobody caught in the moment. She posts what she calls a paternity test to her son's Instagram story. It confirms Blueface, Jonathan Michael Porter, as the biological father. Case closed, right? Except the document was reportedly dated before Chrisean Jr. was even born. A prenatal test. From 2023, which Blueface himself flagged the moment it dropped, telling everyone the paperwork looked more like a legal name change filing than a real paternity result. That's the wrinkle XXL and multiple pop culture reporters kept circling. Stop and appreciate the sheer strangeness of that moment, because I think the speed of the news cycle laundered it. The baby's father, the man who benefits from the document being real, is the one who publicly questioned the document. Think about that. Blueface had every incentive to let that story sit. Let the blogs run it. Let the paternity question die with Karon. And instead he looked at the paperwork and basically told the internet, that's not what that is. When the person who profits from a document is the first one to flag it as suspicious, that's not drama. That's a signal. And let's be precise about what was being waved around. A prenatal paternity test, which is a real thing. They exist. They are done via blood draw from the mother. Produces a result before birth. So a 2023 dated prenatal result isn't automatically fraudulent. But it raises a question nobody on that live, and almost nobody in the coverage, ever asked out loud. If a test existed in 2023 establishing paternity, why did the public paternity war continue through all of 2024? Why the on-camera doubts? Why the back and forth? Why did the Who's the Father storyline keep generating content for another year and change if a lab had already answered it before the baby took his first breath? Either the document wasn't the answer it was presented as, or a question with a known answer was kept artificially alive for engagement. Neither option is flattering. One of them is a lot worse than the other. So, the deleted post, the interview, the filing. Karon spends the back half of 2024 chasing a DNA test in public. He dies in February 2025. Within days, a document surfaces that supposedly ends the paternity question forever. And the document is old. Predates the child. Predates the fight. Sat somewhere for close to 2 years, unused, unseen, until the exact moment the only man loud enough to demand a live test is no longer breathing. That timing, actually. Hold on. Back up. Let me reframe this, because I keep tripping on it. The paper existed. The demand existed. Karon existed. Only one of those three got removed from the equation before the paper got shown. That's not a sequence you draw up. That's a sequence that happens to you. Or a sequence you build. Which is why detectives are still ringing doorbells 17 months later. And here's a detail about that 17 months I haven't seen anybody sit with. Homicide cases go cold for all kinds of reasons. No witnesses, no forensics, no cooperation. That's the tragic norm in a lot of American cities, and Baltimore area jurisdictions know it well. But this case doesn't have the usual cold case profile. The victim was internet known. His final year of life is documented in clips. His grievances are archived. His relationships are mapped across years of public posts. Detectives aren't starting from a blank page here. They are starting from one of the most heavily self-documented social circles in reality TV. If this case is still open after 17 months, it's probably not because there's nothing to look at. It's more likely because there's a lot to look at, and looking at it takes time, and time, for reasons we'll get into, may be exactly what somebody needs. Meanwhile, June 2026, Rock confirms a location publicly, then within weeks starts telling followers on live she's moving abroad. We're moving out the country. We ain't gonna tell you all details, but we're moving. That clip lives on Hollywood Unlocked. Then, almost overlapping, a full religious pivot. Baptism footage. Church is my happy place. Refusing gifts on faith grounds. Leaving secular music for gospel. That whole rollout traced on her IG. Country exit. Christianity. Cooperation with cops confession. All in the same 6-week window. That's not healing. That's PR triage. Now, I want to be careful and fair here, because faith is real and people genuinely do find God under pressure. And Rock wouldn't be the first public figure to walk into a church when the world got heavy. So I'm not mocking the baptism. I'm auditing the sequencing. Because in crisis management, there's an actual playbook. And it's old. Step 1. Change the visual language around the client. Soft colors, family settings, sanctuaries. Step 2. Change the vocabulary. Fewer beefs, more blessings. Step 3. Change the geography if the legal weather gets hot. Any publicist will tell you these are standard moves. And they whack, because audiences are forgiving and algorithms are forgetful. But when you see all 3 steps executed inside 6 weeks, in the middle of an open homicide investigation, while telling a live audience that police personally cleared you at the gym, the grace red and the strategy red start to blur. Maybe both things are true at once. People in crisis absolutely cling to faith. People under legal threat also absolutely rebrand. The tragedy is that one of those truths provides perfect cover for the other. And from the outside, there's no instrument that can measure which one is steering. And one more thing about the move abroad announcement, because the phrasing slipped by, we ain't gonna tell you all details. Public figures announce relocations all the time. That's content. That's a house tour waiting to happen. What they don't usually do is announce a departure while withholding the destination. A move is a flex. A move with the destination redacted is something else. You don't hide a vacation. You hide a jurisdiction. Zoom in. Legal forensics first. And Arundel County is Maryland state jurisdiction, not federal, which means the feds language Rock keeps throwing around on live. Investigators came to me. Is either wrong or she's talking about a different agency entirely. If federal agents are involved in a state homicide, that usually means one thing, interstate elements. Movement of a suspect, a weapon, or conspiracy across state lines. That's not a routine local knock. Per the jurisdictional profile in the TMZ report, the case sits with local homicide detectives, but she keeps saying the feds. Somebody's blurring the badge. I had to read the transcript 3 times to catch that one. It slips past you because she says it fast. And here's why the badge blurring is worth more than a nitpick. When a public figure tells an audience the feds talk to me, most viewers hear authority and stop listening. The word does the work, but the word also smuggles in an implication. Federal involvement sounds bigger, more official, more final. If the feds cleared you, who could argue? It's the jurisdictional version of name-dropping. The problem is, every report on record, including the TMZ piece that got the police on the phone, describes a county case, run by county detectives, in a state system. There is no reported federal footprint. So the feds' language is either a loose vocabulary habit, which is possible, or it's a deliberate upgrade of the authority vouching for her innocence. One is sloppy, the other is strategy. And in this story, sloppy and strategic keep wearing the same outfit. Behavioral forensics. Watch the deflection choreography. Every question about Karon's death gets rerouted to Karon's drug use. Every question about the DNA test gets rerouted to why does that matter now? Every question about the timeline gets rerouted to her own trauma. It's a 3-step, acknowledge, redirect, victimize. On a loop. If you graphed the live, you'd see the same triangle every 90 seconds. Let me give you the second layer of that triangle, the one underneath the choreography. Notice what the redirects all have in common. They move every question away from verifiable territory into unverifiable territory. Whether Karon used drugs is a lifestyle conversation. It can't be checked in the moment, and it puts the audience in judgment of the dead man instead of the living speaker. Why does that matter now is a philosophical shrug. It can't be checked either. Her own trauma is real and haze, and it's the one subject in the world where nobody can fact-check her at all. See the pattern. Concrete question, abstract answer. Every time. That's not how innocent confusion sounds. Innocent confusion rambles towards specifics and trips over them. This was the opposite. A stream of consciousness that somehow never once tripped over a checkable fact. 40 minutes of talking, and the record picked up almost nothing a detective could use. You can call that trauma brain. You can also call it message discipline from a woman who has spent her entire adult life in front of cameras. I've watched enough lives to know which one I saw. Verbal forensics, one word. She said low-key I love Karon. Low-key. Present tense. Love. Not loved. A woman who allegedly had nothing to do with a man's death typically doesn't need to hedge her affection for him in real time. The tense slip is the tell. Grief speaks in past tense. Guilt speaks in present. That's not a rule of law. That's a rule of language. And look, before the comments come for me, tense slips happen. People misspeak on camera every day. And I'm not a court. And a live is not a deposition. But statement analysis as a discipline exists for a reason, and investigators do use it. And one of its oldest observations is that speakers betray their true relationship to a subject through exactly these small grammatical choices. Past tense means the relationship has ended, usually because the person has died and the speaker has emotionally processed that death. Present tense means that, in the speaker's mind, something is still live, still active, still ongoing. Karon has been in the ground for a year and a half. What, exactly, is still ongoing? Who is that sentence still talking to? Maybe nobody. Maybe it's just a slip. But in a stream where every other word seemed to root around the checkable, the one word that slipped through the routing was that one. Make of it what you will. I know what I made of it. All right, moving. This is where you see the story fracture across outlets, and each fracture tells you who's protecting what. Complex played at straight arrow, unsolved, ongoing, no arrests. Here are the facts. Clinical, careful, zero editorializing. Which, given Complex's history of leaning into hip-hop drama, reads almost strategic. When they go dry, they're usually anticipating a libel exposure. They're covering their glass. TMZ framed it around Rock's denial, headline structure that centers her voice. Not the victim. Not the family. That framing choice matters. TMZ knows Rock's clicks. Making her the subject of the sentence pulls her audience in. It's not neutral. It's traffic engineering. Meanwhile, the Facebook syndication of the story leans into the streets are saying angle. That's a different beast. It's crowdsourced accusation dressed up as journalism. And it's where most young viewers are actually getting the story. Not from complex. From reels that begin with "the streets are saying," which is legally bulletproof and morally slippery. 3 outlets. 3 different stories. Same corpse. And here's the 4th outlet nobody lists, the live itself. Because the most important media property in this entire story isn't Complex or TMZ or any blog. It's Chrisean Rock's own account. She is the single largest distribution channel in her own case. When she goes live, she reaches more people, faster, with zero editorial filter, than every outlet covering her combined. That's the structural shift that makes this a genuinely modern story. The subject of an open investigation can out-broadcast the investigation. Police communicate through spokespeople and press releases, on the record, with lawyers reading every word. She communicates through a front camera, raw, unmediated, to an audience primed to believe her. It's not a fair fight over the narrative. One side has rules. The other side has ring lights. Which is also why "the streets are saying" format metastasized so fast here. That phrasing is the gossip economy's load-bearing wall. It converts accusation into attribution, and attribution into plausible deniability. Nobody ever has to say she did it. They just report that the streets are saying it, and the streets, conveniently, can never be deposed. The result is an information environment where a 24-year-old man's killing gets processed through the same machinery that processes album rollouts and relationship drama. Same thumbnails, same fonts, same engagement bait. And once a homicide enters that economy, the truth isn't competing with lies anymore. It's competing with content. Content always wins on volume. The only thing it can't beat is a courtroom. And a courtroom is exactly what this case, 17 months in, still hasn't produced. Now, the loudest counter-narrative deserves a fair swing. The Steelman goes, Rock is a public figure being scapegoated for crime with no ballistic tie, no witness statement, no charging document, and a boyfriend who was reportedly moving product from a residential basement in a state with active gang activity. That's a plausible universe. Karon had public enemies, live-streamed enemies. A drug lifestyle carries risks that have nothing to do with paternity disputes. Faye. And let me make the Steelman even stronger before I test it, because it deserves the full weight. Scapegoating famous women for street violence is a real, documented pattern. The internet does it constantly, and it does it with a special enthusiasm when the woman is loud, black, tattooed, and unrepentant, because she's already being cast as the villain in 100 other storylines. Rock's entire public history, the fights, the arrests, the chaos, all of it extensively covered over the years, means the audience walked into this story with a pre-written character sheet. It's easy to believe the worst about her. Ease is not evidence. And the alternative theory of the crime isn't exotic. If the basement operation she described on live was real, and she described it herself, which is the wildest part, then Karon was sitting on top of exactly the kind of economy that produces targeted shootings without any celebrity involvement at all. Drug disputes, territory, money owed. A man with enemies in inventory is a man with exposure. That's not speculation, that's actuarial reality, and any honest telling has to keep it on the table. But then you weigh that against a paternity document that predates the child, a public exit plan mid-investigation, and a sister who won't say the words but keeps circling them like buzzards. And the Steelman gets thinner. Not gone. Thinner. You can be scapegoated and be shady. Both things can live in the same body. And I'll add the synthesis the comment sections never reach, because the camps have spent 17 months screaming past each other. The scapegoat theory and the suspicion theory aren't actually enemies. They can coexist in the same case file. Rock can be a genuinely over-scrutinized public figure, dogged by a narrative that was waiting for her and a person whose behavior around this specific death keeps generating legitimate questions. The internet demands you pick one frame, because picking one frame is what gets engagement. But real cases don't care about frames. Detectives, notably, haven't picked one either. An open file with no arrests after 17 months is its own statement. They haven't cleared the narrative, and they haven't closed it. Everybody else chose a side. The people with the actual evidence chose to keep looking. Here's the read the press won't print, because it can't be sourced without a subpoena. Everyone's chasing the murder question. Did she do it? Did she order it? Did she know? That's the wrong question. The wrong question, because the answer is locked in a police file we're not getting until charges drop, if they ever do. The The right question is, what economic engine did Karon threaten? Let me build it. Chrisean Jr. is a brand asset. That's uncomfortable to say out loud, but it's true. The child's proximity to Blueface, a rapper with active label deals, streaming revenue, brand equity, is monetizable in ways that reach far beyond child support. Content, cameos, merch, reality TV spin-offs, documentary rights, custody drama sells better than any single. And every dollar of that ecosystem depends on one immovable assumption, the last name attached to the baby. And understand, this isn't theoretical economics. This model has a track record. The Rock-Blueface relationship, in all its chaos, was one of the most reliably monetizable sagas in the history of the reality streaming era. The fights trended. The breakups trended. The reconciliations trended. Networks built programming around their orbit. Clips of their worst moments did numbers most artists' best moments never touch. The machine proved, over and over, that dysfunction between these two people converted directly into views, and views converted directly into money. The child didn't enter that machine as a child. He entered it as the final, unkillable storyline, the thing that would keep two volatile people narratively chained together forever, generating content whether they loved each other, hated each other, or never spoke again. Custody content, co-parenting content, birthdays, court dates, holiday disputes. The machine doesn't need them together. It just needs the child's last name to stay fixed, because the last name is the through line every future storyline hangs from. Karon threatened the last name. Not with violence. With science. A confirmed DNA test proving Karon was the biological father wouldn't just embarrass. It would detonate. The child's marketability collapses overnight. The Blueface storyline gets rewritten from co-parenting saga to she was lying the whole time. Every past appearance, every viral clip, every payday retroactively reads as a con. Sponsors run. Labels distance. The whole Rock-Blueface content universe, worth, allegedly, into 7 figures across the years of virality, implodes. And the detonation wouldn't stop at Rock. That's the part that widens the blast radius beyond one woman's reputation. Blueface himself, from behind bars, where he was serving time through much of this window, as widely reported, would lose the family man storyline that humanized his brand. His other relationships, his other children's storylines, his whole co-parenting economy gets relitigated in public. The network that built programming around the couple has a library of content that retroactively curdles. The family members who monetize proximity to the saga lose the saga. Managers, publicists, platforms, everyone who drew a check off the Rock-Blueface engine had a shared, unspoken interest in one thing. The paternity question staying a question. Questions are content. Answers are audits. Karon wasn't threatening a woman. He was threatening a revenue stream with a lot of mouths attached to it. And revenue streams, historically, defend themselves, not always with violence, almost never traceably with violence, but with lawyers, with documents, with narrative management, and with patience. That's not motive for murder. Legally, we can't say that. Ethically, I won't. But it is motive for silence at all costs. For a paternity document mysteriously dated in 2023 to appear the moment a demand is no longer being made. For a country exit. For a religious rebrand. For an Instagram live that spends 40 minutes talking about drugs in a basement, and about 90 seconds addressing whether a child belongs to a dead man. The industry doesn't murder. The industry insulates. An insulation, in 2026, looks like a document, a plane ticket, and a rosary. Say it plain, this story isn't about who pulled the trigger. It's about who wrote the paperwork. Sit with that. And while you're sitting with it, one more layer. Because the paperwork theme goes deeper than one document. Think about what paper has done in this story from the start. A paternity claim, fought with a filing instead of a swab. A clearance from police, delivered as a story told on live instead of a document anyone can request. An exit from the country, announced without a destination. An itinerary that exists, presumably, as actual book paper nobody's shown. Even the baptism exists, now, as footage, content, papered over the timeline. Every single hard question in this saga has been answered with an artifact that gestures at proof without ever being proof. And every single hard question that's been answered with something verifiable, the open investigation, the targeted shooting determination, the still active status, has pointed in the opposite direction. Verifiable things keep contradicting artifacts. 17 months in. That's the cleanest pattern this story has produced. Paper says one thing. The record says another. One of them is winning the internet. The other one is winning the case file. Only one of those two rooms has subpoena power. Watch how the next 90 days play out. Don't be shocked when a second paternity test, a real one, court-ordered, post-mortem eligible via Karon's next of kin, starts getting whispered about in filings. Karon's family has cause. His aunt has already been on record. All it takes is one civil probate action from Maryland, and suddenly the 2023 document Rock waved around has to survive cross-examination. That's the path most likely to land, because it doesn't require any homicide charge to move. It just requires grief plus a lawyer plus a swab. Let me explain why that path is so dangerous for the existing narrative. Because the mechanics matter. A civil action lives in a different universe than a criminal case. Criminal court needs proof beyond a reasonable doubt, the highest bar in American law, and the reason 17 months have passed with no arrests. Civil court needs a preponderance, more likely than not, 51%. And civil court comes with discovery, compelled documents, compelled testimony, sworn depositions where the three-step deflection triangle doesn't work because there's a court reporter, an oath, and a lawyer whose entire job is noticing the redirect. The 2023 document doesn't just get waved at a camera in that room. It gets authenticated. Chain of custody, lab accreditation, metadata, who audited it, who paid for it, who held it for 2 years, and why it surfaced the week it surfaced. Every question the live routed around becomes a question a judge can compel an answer to. That's why the smart money watches the civil docket, not the criminal one. Criminal cases punish. Civil cases reveal. And revelation is the one thing this entire ecosystem has been organized, for 2 years, to prevent. The next window is louder. Once Rock leaves the country, if she actually does, and she's telegraphed it enough times that it's not a bluff, expect the US media cycle to reframe her overnight. She stops being controversial reality figure and becomes person of interest fled abroad. That reframe alone changes brand deals, streaming metrics, algorithmic reach. Her own team will scramble to spin it as a spiritual retreat. Won't matter. The internet has already written the caption. And there's a hard-edged consequence to the exit that almost nobody's raised. Jurisdiction. Leaving the country doesn't end an investigation. Everyone knows that much. But it changes the mechanics of every next step. Interviews that were a drive away become diplomatic. A future grand jury subpoena becomes an extradition question. And extradition questions depend entirely on which country, which treaty, which charges, if any. None of that means flight implies guilt. People move abroad for 100 innocent reasons, and celebrities do it for taxes, for peace, for content. But the destination she declined to name will matter enormously if the case ever heats up. And the fact that she declined to name it means somebody, somewhere in her orbit, already knows that. Legal counsel doesn't let a client announce an international move mid-investigation without a conversation. Either that conversation happened and the move is calculated, or it didn't happen and the move is chaos. Given the discipline of everything else in that 6-week window, I know which one I'd bet on. Aftershock, 5 years out. This is the part nobody's thinking about. Chrisean Jr. becomes a teenager. Teenagers ask questions. Teenagers Google. A child raised in the wreckage of unresolved paternity, an unsolved murder, a religious pivot mom, and a father whose relevance rises and falls with prison stints. That kid is going to want answers the internet is happy to provide. Whatever gets buried in 2026 doesn't stay buried. It comes back in 2031 wearing headphones and a phone with better search than we've got now. Whoever wins the next 90 days doesn't win the story. The story belongs to the child, eventually. The opposition, meaning the she was framed camp, is going to fumble one specific thing. They are going to keep defending the paternity document. That's the weakest tile in the mosaic. Once anyone with legal training pulls on that thread in court, the whole cloth unwinds. And you can't out-argue a lab result with an Instagram caption. Something's gonna crack. Might be a filing. Might be a family member. Might be Rock herself, on live, at 3 a.m., unable to help it. You'll see. One last marker to watch, because the cracks in stories like this almost never come from where you're staring. They don't come from the principal. Principals get coached. Principals get careful. And Rock, whatever else is true, has survived a decade of cameras by knowing where the lens is. The cracks come from the perimeter. The friend who wasn't on the payroll that month. The cousin who feels unseen. The associate who gets picked up on something unrelated and suddenly has something to trade. 17 months of silence in a circle this large, this online, this monetized. That's not loyalty holding. That's pricing holding. And pricing, in every case like this one that eventually broke, is a temporary condition. Somebody's number gets met, or somebody's patience runs out, or somebody's grief outgrows their check. Karon's family is still out there. His aunt is still on record. The demand for the swab is still alive. And it's the one demand in this whole story that gets stronger with time instead of weaker. Because every year that passes without it is another year it looks like somebody's afraid of it. The clock isn't neutral in this case. The clock is a witness. And it's still testifying. Alright, this is where I leave it. You'll rode all the way to the end. Which means you already know what to do. Hit like, hit subscribe, hit the bell, and be here when part 2 drops, because the paperwork on this one is just getting warmed up. Fame Cryptix out.